Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to my channel. My name is Sue on Chatu Sue, a channel where we talk about stuff that we need to talk about. Could be with our children, our parents, our families, and society as a whole. A disclaimer, the topic today is very heavy, and if you feel triggered in any way, please seek help. There are places where you can get help for free here in South Africa, right? Today's topic is complex trauma. What is complex trauma? Complex trauma is a trauma where it happens continuously. It doesn't stop. Like physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse, right? These traumas cause complex trauma because they continuously happening. They never stop. Right? For an example, if you are in a household or in a space where there's always constant yelling, constant shouting, and there is demeaning kind of communication between people. It could be between a parent and a child, or between people in a relationship. That causes complex trauma, right? But I've got an expert on this, Tim Fleischer, who will explain more on what complex trauma is. Please note that I've cut the video, is very long, it's like 45 minutes. I will put the link on the description below for the people who wants to watch the whole thing. Let's hear what he says.
Inflicts complex trauma on a child. There are 4 different ways that a person can experience complex trauma. Number 1, if you grew up in a family of abuse. That's the most obvious one. And it can be physical abuse, but it does not have to be physical abuse. Most of you who have experienced verbal and emotional abuse know that it often hurts more than physical abuse. To be called down, to be made fun of, to be called hurtful names, to be called stupid, all of those things are forms of abuse. And then probably the worst one is sexual abuse. And we talked about that recently, that about 50% of women addicts have been sexually abused. If I take this beyond school, or beyond home, this complex trauma can be going to school where you're bullied. So every day you're going to school and you're nervous, you're on guard, you can't relax. The whole time you're at school, that's complex trauma. Just as much as if it was happening in your home. And it does not just have to be at your home or at school. It can be anybody that is more powerful physically or in a position of power who does stuff and says stuff that hurts you. That also is complex trauma. And many will relate to having a father who maybe never hit you or never said negative things, but he was a dictator. It was his way or the highway. You did what he wanted. You weren't allowed to offer your opinion. You weren't allowed to challenge anything. You just did what you were told, no questions asked. And that is also a form of trauma. And we'll look at that in more detail. The next one, which is really becoming more and more understood, and it is just as severe as abuse, is neglect. And what we are realizing is that neglect actually can do greater damage in some areas than a physical verbal abuse. It is equally traumatizing. And next week I'll expand on it. But what I want you to think about tonight is if you grew up in a home where your parents were workaholics and they were never emotionally available to you, they were not able, maybe they didn't have the tools, maybe they had their own health issues, their own problems they were dealing with, but they weren't able to be there for you when you were hurting or needing to learn something, you felt abandoned. You felt rejected, and you did not feel safe. And so those we're realizing cause a lot of trauma. The third one, which is a huge one, is abandonment. In the past, we would have just referred to a child that is given up for adoption or turned over to CFS as being, that's trauma. We would get that. But what we're now realizing is that children who go through the divorce of parents, that's complex trauma, because their little secure world is now rocked. And all that they kind of look to as their rock is not there for them now, and there's an instability in that. Another thing that can come from that is if a parent dies or a grandparent dies, they're not purposely abandoning you, but it feels like abandonment. And so to the child, all of a sudden their world has changed, and somebody they've relied on is not there for them, and that is complex trauma. Now we're also seeing that even babies that are adopted, before they have any memories of that it is actually affecting them. And we'll look at that more later. But all of those things become trauma of abandonment. One other thing that I would just add to that is if you grew up in a home and was fairly good, let's say, but all of a sudden over a period of a year or two, you went through loss after loss after loss. Your pet might have died. Your grandma might have died. Your dad might have died. Others might have died. You had to move, etc. Say goodbye to your friends. It's like loss, 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 back to back to back. All of a sudden, my world is surrounded by insecurity and I don't feel safe. So that can have an equal effect. The fourth one, which I want to develop, because this is where it starts getting into the very subtle forms of complex trauma, is we teach at Finding Freedom that we were built with a set of 12 needs inside of us. Central to those 12 needs are certain physical and emotional needs. And if those needs were not consistently met, to a child, that is complex trauma. So let me just quickly go through them. There's the need for safety, which includes food, shelter, a roof over your head. Some people didn't have that, and so they had to go without food. They maybe had to go and beg food from neighbors because mom and dad were drunk and they didn't have any food. That's trauma. Now, the very subtle ones. If a child grows up where they do not feel respected or valued, if they're made to feel stupid, less than, fat, all of those things, little shots that are taken, that child cannot relax. That child doesn't feel accepted for who they are. All of a sudden, they're being told, if only you were like your sister, or if only you were smarter, or if only you weren't this way. And they're always kind of being made to feel not good enough. That's trauma. I am always in danger of being hurt because nobody accepts me. That is the most subtle form of complex trauma. And so you could have a family that provided for you in all kinds of ways, but they never fully accepted you. And if that was the case, I would venture that you would have some degree of complex trauma because you never felt totally safe in that environment. Then there's a need to belong, to feel part of. And some kids always, because they weren't accepted, they just always felt like the black sheep of the family, that they didn't fit in with the family. That is trauma. And then we have a need for validation, to be told that we have certain positive characteristics and abilities. If a child is never given validation, only criticism, that is trauma for them. And then we have a need to feel safe, that life will be fair, that life will be consistently just, and that if somebody breaks a rule, that the consequence will happen. But if you grew up in a home where dad one day is saying, oh, you did something that broke a rule, I'm in a good mood today, no big deal, and the next day you break the rule and you get smacked in the head, you're going, I don't know what to expect in any given day. All of a sudden, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells because there's no consistency in the rule enforcement around here. And then if you get a dad, one day, he's in a good mood, he takes everybody out for ice cream. And the next day, he tells all of them how selfish they are and how they're always wanting his money. And you're going, I'm getting a mixed message here that's making me feel unsafe. The next thing we need to, in order to feel safe, is we need honesty. We need to be able to trust. And if you grew up in a home where there's not honesty and you can't trust people in your home, that's trauma. And you may never have thought about it, but I hope you can see, wow, that does make a child feel unsafe, that they can't relax. All of us have a desire for intimacy, and that includes a desire to be open and honest without being judged or criticized, to be able to share our fears, our sadness, our failures, and be accepted and nurtured in that. If you grew up in a family where if you talk about things, they get blabbed everywhere, or you get made fun of, or you get told that you're being stupid or you're weak, all of a sudden you can't share anything. Wow, you're not safe now, because you don't know when you're going to get criticized for what you share. And then if you're in an environment where you're expected to go from age 2 in clumsiness to age 10 in one day, and so all of a sudden you do everything perfectly and you never make a mess, and if you're expected to do that, you all of a sudden are in an environment where you're nervous. Because if I fail, or if I trip, or if I spill my milk, I'm going to get called down, I'm going to get punished, and if I'm crying, I'm going to get told to grow up and to act like a man, and all of that makes a person feel very unsafe. And so that is another thing. Another one is consistent boundaries. If you grew up where one day the rule's here and the next day the rule's here, and that there's not a consistent boundary or it's not enforced, you don't feel safe. If it's not unconditional love, but always there's conditions to your love, or the love that you receive from parents, so they only are loving if you're super good, but if you ever do anything wrong, you're in the doghouse and they let you know about it, that's not safe. And so all of that is trauma. And that's the part that I want to emphasize, because that's the part that's not being taught in kind of the mainstream teaching at this point. But in my experience, not having those needs consistently met, when people begin to realize that, they begin to realize, I grew up not feeling safe because of that. That is equally trauma. Now, I put that another way. What happens in every human being is that pain is designed to be a positive thing. So if you have a toothache, you go, I got a problem. You go to the dentist, it gets fixed. So pain notifies you something isn't right so that you can fix it. What happens to a child who's growing up in danger, where they're in pain or trauma? They are wanting to find a...
There we are. Yeah, it's a very heavy topic. So if you're very interested to understand more, I've put the whole video at the description box below. Yeah, please follow Tim Fletcher as well. He's really great. I mean, you know, regarding the traumas and how to deal with it. But yeah, I'm sending you so much love and so much healing. Till we talk again soon. Much love. Bye.